Tensions between the United States and Mexico have reached a breaking point. President Trump has announced a new wave of tariffs on Mexican goods, sparking an intense trade battle between the two countries. But Mexico isn't backing down. In a bold countermeasure, the Mexican government has cut off exports of crucial auto parts to the U.S. In recent years, Mexico has recognized the risks of being too dependent on imports from countries like China. To tackle this, the government has launched initiatives to bolster domestic production. One significant effort is Plan Mexico, which aims to strengthen North America's supply chain resilience. This plan offers financial and tax incentives to encourage companies to relocate their production facilities closer to consumer markets, a practice known as nearshoring. By doing so, Mexico hopes to reduce supply chain disruptions and take advantage of its proximity to U.S. markets. But Mexico isn't going it alone. Recognizing the importance of collaboration, the country is working closely with U.S. companies to strengthen North American supply chains. A notable example is the formation of a supply chain working group between the U.S. and Mexico. This group focuses on expanding cooperation in semiconductor and information and communications technology (ICT) supply chains. Such partnerships aim to minimize disruptions and reduce vulnerabilities in critical industries. Additionally, the U.S. Department of State has partnered with the Mexican government to explore opportunities to grow and diversify the global semiconductor ecosystem. This collaboration seeks to enhance the region's competitiveness in the vital sector. Under the Trump administration, new tariffs raise costs of importing steel and aluminum from Mexico by as much as 25%. While intended to protect American manufacturing and jobs, these tariffs unintentionally increased production expenses for U.S.-based automakers, making it financially advantageous for companies like Stellantis to relocate production facilities to Mexico, rather than importing costly materials into the United States.
Indian export from his country had increased by more than 1,600%. The government official described the U.S. tariffs increase as unfair.
Imagine trying to build a car and suddenly facing roadblocks in getting the parts you need. That's the reality now for many U.S. automakers. Mexico, a crucial player in the auto supply chain, is adjusting its policies to encourage domestic production and reduce dependence on Chinese imports. While this sounds good in theory, in practice, it's causing delays and shortages. Parts that once flowed smoothly across borders are now held up, disrupting production schedules and creating uncertainty in the supply chain. With these supply chain hiccups, manufacturers are feeling the pinch. They're facing higher costs to source parts, especially with the added complexity of tariffs. These increased costs don't just stay in the factory, they trickle down to us, the consumers. Experts warn that car prices could jump up by as much as $12,000. This is particularly concerning when you consider the average price of a new car is already over $48,000. Suddenly owning a car becomes even more expensive.
To Mexico than it imports from Mexico. Everett pointed out that the tariffs could affect the markets of Canada, the United States, and Mexico by increasing the price of the products made jointly by the three North American nations.
But wait, there's more. These changes aren't just affecting prices, they're also impacting how U.S. automakers stack up against the rest of the world. With production costs rising and supply chains in turmoil, American car manufacturers might find themselves at a disadvantage. Competitors in other countries aren't facing the same hurdles, allowing them to offer more competitive prices and better meet consumer demand. If this trend continues, U.S. automakers could lose market share both at home and abroad. So what's fueling this chaos? A big part of it is the new tariffs imposed by the U.S. government. Starting April 2nd, a 25% tariff is set to hit many imports from Mexico and Canada, including crucial auto parts. This move aims to encourage domestic production, but is having the opposite effect. Instead of bringing jobs back, it's causing prices to soar and create uncertainty in the market. Mexico isn't taking this lying down either. Industry leaders are pushing back, highlighting the deep integration of the North American auto industry. They argue that these tariffs disrupt established supply chains and could lead to job losses rather than gains. The message is clear. Tampering with these complex networks without a solid plan can do more harm than good. The situation is further complicated by escalating trade tensions. Retaliatory measures from affected countries are on the horizon, which could lead to a tit-for-tat scenario. This back and forth not only creates uncertainty, but also hampers the ability of businesses to plan and invest wisely. For consumers, this means fewer choices and higher prices. The immediate result has been heightened uncertainty among workers, negatively impacting morale, productivity, and employee loyalty. While jobs in Michigan may remain stable in the short term, the looming possibility of additional production shifts to Mexico creates persistent unease. Industry analysts warn this decision may trigger a domino effect, with other manufacturers potentially following Stellantis' example, further eroding Detroit's traditional role as the heart of America's auto industry. Think of tariffs as a double-edged sword. Yes, tariffs discourage imports, theoretically protecting American industries. But here's the problem. U.S. automakers heavily rely on imported materials, especially steel and aluminum from Mexico. So instead of saving American jobs, these tariffs are actually creating increased cost of building cars right here in the U.S., which gets passed on to consumers. Ironically, this policy meant to punish Mexico and protect American workers is pushing automakers to produce even more vehicles outside the U.S., in Mexico. After all, if it's cheaper to build your entire vehicle in Mexico and avoid import tariffs altogether, why wouldn't you? This unintended consequence could end up encouraging more companies to shift production outside U.S. borders. But what if other automakers follow suit? Could we be heading toward a scenario where American factories gradually shut down, replaced by cheaper, tariff-free alternatives in Mexico? We saw trade wars under Trump before, but this time it feels different. Are we about to witness history repeating itself? This time with even worse consequences for the American economy? Now here's a twist few saw coming. Mexico isn't just targeting American factories. It's also quietly cutting ties with China. Why? Because Mexico needs to ensure it remains within the USMCA's strict requirements, which limits the use of parts from outside North America. Sounds simple, right? Well, there's more to it. Mexico used to heavily depend on cheap Chinese parts to build cars, but now they're rapidly shifting toward locally made or North American alternatives. They're even launching ambitious plans to produce microchips domestically, a bold, challenging move, considering even America has struggled to localize chip production. Could Mexico's ambitious move to eliminate reliance on Chinese parts actually strengthen its position as a manufacturing powerhouse? Think about it. If Mexico succeeds, they'll offer lower-cost, tariff-free, fully North American-made cars. That's a huge competitive advantage. There's more to worry about. If Mexico becomes self-sufficient and no longer relies on Chinese components, it could become the preferred place for automakers looking to avoid tariffs. Will this eventually drain the life out of American factories, replacing Detroit's dominance with Mexico's rising star? Now, is this move purely defensive, or is Mexico strategically positioning itself to dominate North American auto manufacturing? This isn't just adapting to rules. It's a carefully executed plan that could permanently shift automotive power from Detroit to Mexico. But wait, the story isn't over yet. There's still much more unfolding behind the scenes. You know that feeling when you trust a company to be deeply rooted in America, and then suddenly they make a shocking move? Well, that's exactly what happened with Stellantis. The company decided to expand its production down in Mexico. At first, it seemed odd. Why would they build America's favorite truck outside of America? The truth isn't complicated. It's cheaper. Labor costs in Mexico are significantly cheaper than in Michigan, and Stellantis saw an opportunity they just couldn't ignore. Think about it like this. If you're running a huge auto company and tariffs from importing parts into the US have suddenly skyrocketed, wouldn't you look for a cheaper way out? That's exactly what Stellantis did when the US recently slapped a 25% tariff on Mexican imports of steel and aluminum, making it far more expensive to assemble cars domestically. But hold on, there's even more beneath the surface. See, this isn't just a straightforward cost-cutting measure. By expanding in Mexico, Stellantis positions itself perfectly to comply with the rules of the USMCA, the updated NAFTA, that demands more North American-made parts. Essentially, they're adapting smartly to keep their trucks affordable in the US market by reducing dependency on expensive imports. Pretty clever, right? Still, we can't ignore the elephant in the room. What does this mean for Detroit, America's historic motor city? Could this be the start of Detroit's slow decline? Sure, Stellantis promises it'll continue building trucks in Michigan, but what if the trend continues? Could other automakers follow suit, lured by cheaper labor and fewer regulations? Detroit could lose jobs, production plants might close, and the city's legendary status could be at risk. But wait, there's more to this story than meets the eye, because Mexico isn't just playing defense here. They've got bigger plans. Have you ever wondered what factory workers in Detroit think about this? Well, let's dive a little deeper. Now imagine you're a worker at Stellantis' plant in Sterling Heights, Michigan. You've invested years in the company, built a life around your stable job, and suddenly, news breaks that your employer is shifting production to another country. How would you feel? Worried? Anxious? Angry? Probably all three. That's exactly what's happening right now with thousands of American auto workers. The move to Mexico isn't just another headline. It's their livelihood potentially slipping away. The United Auto Workers Union has raised alarms, fearing this decision could snowball into more plants shutting down and more jobs disappearing. Can you imagine going into work every day with the constant fear your job could vanish overnight? But here's the kicker. It's not just about lower wages in Mexico. The regulatory environment is more relaxed, making it easier and cheaper to produce cars quickly. Fewer rules means fewer headaches for automakers, but fewer protections for workers. If companies keep choosing Mexico over America, it could seriously undermine job security for auto workers across the country. So is this the beginning of the end for American auto jobs, or just an isolated incident? Only time will tell, but the fear is real, and it's spreading. You might be thinking tariffs are supposed to protect American workers, right? On paper, Trump's 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum from Mexico sound like they're meant to safeguard American jobs. But what if I told you they're having the exact opposite effect? These tariffs are driving up costs for US automakers, making it harder to keep production affordable domestically. So what do you think companies will do when faced with higher costs here at home? Exactly, they'll simply move production elsewhere. The scenario already played out once before during the last round of Trump-era tariffs, pushing manufacturers to relocate operations to Mexico. Are we on the verge of history repeating itself? Only this time with far more severe consequences? An unintended consequence of the Trump administration's tariffs on imported steel and aluminum could be the accelerated migration of American auto manufacturing to Mexico. Rather than protecting American jobs, these tariffs have inadvertently made domestic manufacturing significantly more expensive. As production costs rise, automakers may increasingly shift their factories and thousands of American jobs south of the border, attracted by lower costs and tariff-free access back into the US market. Yet tariffs aren't the only reason for this potential shift. Mexico has strategically begun replacing its reliance on Chinese-made automotive parts with domestically produced or North American alternatives. This change is directly linked to the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, which requires vehicles to contain a high percentage of North American-made components to qualify for tariff-free entry into the US. By eliminating dependence on Chinese components, Mexico stands to gain a substantial competitive advantage. Automakers operating within Mexico can significantly lower their production costs, avoiding tariffs completely and ensuring compliance with USMCA regulations. This shift could position Mexico not merely as an affordable production location, but as a strategically superior manufacturing hub compared to American factories. Moreover, Mexico's ambition goes beyond simply meeting regulatory standards. The country is actively reshaping its automotive supply chain by investing in advanced manufacturing capabilities, including domestic microchip production. If Mexico successfully transitions to a fully integrated North American-based automotive supply chain, it could emerge as the dominant automotive manufacturing powerhouse in the region. As a result, Detroit's long-standing automotive dominance faces unprecedented threats. Mexico's calculated moves position it not just as a competitor, but potentially as a new leader in North American auto manufacturing, leaving the U.S. automotive sector increasingly vulnerable to further offshoring and economic decline. But wait, there's still one key question. How would this shift impact you and me, the average American consumer? Think about this. If automakers keep shifting their factories and supply chains around, who do you think ends up footing the bill? Yup, it's us everyday Americans. Cars and trucks are already expensive. and any disruption to the supply chain pushes costs higher. If automakers are forced to change suppliers, move factories, or comply with new trade rules, guess what happens? The price tag on your next vehicle goes up, and maybe not by just a little bit. Imagine walking into a dealership and suddenly realizing it's now thousands of dollars more expensive than last year. Would you still buy it, or would you walk away? Now multiply this scenario by millions of Americans, and you'll see how quickly this could become a huge economic problem. We might soon be in a situation where vehicles become unaffordable for many Americans, exactly the opposite of what tariffs were intended to achieve. Is this really the future we want, where trucks and cars are luxuries only a few can afford? Let's talk a bit more about Mexico's bold move away from Chinese-made parts. It's not as simple as swapping out one supplier for another. It's a complete revolution of the automotive supply chain. Mexico isn't just making the shift to comply with the USMCA. They're strategically positioning themselves as the go-to place for American automakers. But why abandon China? Well, China has been Mexico's primary supplier for cheap automotive parts for decades. But under the current trade rules, these Chinese components would trigger heavy tariffs on finished vehicles entering the US market. By shifting to Mexican or North American-made parts, Mexico ensures their cars remain attractive, affordable, and tariff-free in the US market. The question now is, will this move make Mexico unstoppable? If Mexico's supply chain becomes fully localized, automakers worldwide might prefer Mexico to America. Suddenly, the US would lose its leverage, bargaining power, and manufacturing advantage. Would Mexico become the new Detroit? This parts revolution is not just a quiet adjustment. It's a strategic game-changing move. Mexico's plan might look simple, but it's potentially devastating to American manufacturing. Think about Detroit for a moment. It used to be America's pride, a powerhouse city that built some of the most iconic vehicles in the world. But recently, decisions by automakers, like Stellantis, are painting a disturbing picture. Is this shift of production to Mexico a sign of something much bigger? Could Detroit's struggles be part of a broader slow-motion disaster unfolding in front of our eyes? Let me break it down for you. America's always been a powerhouse in manufacturing, especially cars. Remember when Detroit factories ran around the clock and workers proudly stood behind brands like Ford, GM, and Chrysler? That was the golden age of American manufacturing. But today, piece by piece, that dominance is quietly slipping away, and Stellantis' move to Mexico might just accelerate this troubling trend. But hold on, it's not like everything's changed overnight. This shift began decades ago, with companies slowly realizing it was cheaper to make cars abroad, especially in countries like Mexico, where labor and regulatory costs are lower. Yet every time another automaker moves production out of America, it chips away at our industrial backbone. Sure, it might seem small at first, just one factory here, another factory there, but these moves accumulate over time. Could Stellantis' move be the beginning of a domino effect that reshapes the entire industry? What are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comment section down below.